All right, we are back, and we've got Scott Kight here from Checkpoint. He's going to talk to us about securing corporate data on mobile devices.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, guys. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about mobile devices and just to continue that wonderful introduction from earlier. Yeah, I am a go-kart racer. As you saw in the picture, I'm a diver, and I'm a cyclist. Those are the three big things that I do. Plus, right now, it seems that the other thing I am is a hunter, but a terribly unsuccessful hunter for a PS5. But I think that I'm not the only one on that one. God, that thing is, whew, it's difficult. And it sucks when you see pictures of people with like 20 of them.
Good
Come
luck,
on.
yeah. And they're selling them on eBay for like $1,000. Like, come
Oh
on,
yeah,
guys.
exactly. And I'm not going to pay $1,000. I'll wait the 2 months. It will show up. But
Yeah.
like I said earlier, I have a teenage daughter, or a stepdaughter, and I have a couple cats as well. Um, they are kittens, so I threw the picture up here because if you hear me all of a sudden stumble and act like I don't know what the hell is going on around me, like I'm having a seizure, those two are the reason why. They're kittens, and this is their crazy kind of time. If you've ever had cats, you know that cats, like, for about an hour a day, they lose their minds, and they are losing their minds. They have been in and out of this room at least 50 times while we've been talking, and I'm just waiting for one to just jump up and like knock into the laptop and knock into me. So
Nice.
figured to get that out of the way. So, yeah. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about Checkpoint and what we've done in terms of research. I have minimized all the marketing crap out of this deck. I wanted this to be us chat amongst friends, not a chat of where I'm trying to sell. It's not really the purpose. Although obviously we do have some products and things. Um, We'll be talking about what we think are the best practices, and realistically, when we're talking about mobile devices, what kind of strategies should we lay out there in terms of products as a general rule, as well as, of course, our specific products that would help make sure that your devices are and stay safe. So, with that, I'm under legal obligation to throw the one thing out there. This is the one kind of overarching marketing slide. I'll get it out of the way. Checkpoint has lots of crap. We have lots of products that satisfy all kinds of different things. We started out as a firewall company 20 something years ago. We actually invented the first stateful firewall. So if you think about how everything after that really kind of cheated off of it. No, copied off of us. There we go. We've kind of extended it from there slightly into network, into cloud, into mobility protection, endpoint protection solutions, et cetera. So, okay, there's the marketing out of the way. Now I'll get back into the rest of the stuff. So we had the slide a while ago. This was our take on kind of how we looked at uh, the way the world was moving last year. And then COVID hit, and then everything pushed this direction.
Yeah.
We were telling people a year ago, you're going to have more remote workers. You're going to have people who are doing more work outside of the office. You're going to have more mobility usage. You're just going to lose that perimeter, as we call it, that is your company. It's your offices and whatnot. And then COVID hit, and the reality was just striking. Everybody had to move on from whatever they felt comfortable with and get out to where they weren't comfortable, where the security wasn't quite the same as it was before. They lost a lot of control, and they really didn't have any choice in the matter.
We need
Um,
MCAS. We need it right now.
exactly. I mean, look, I'll give you an example from something I did last year. It was a meeting with a bunch of government officials, and one of the government officials was saying, BYOD is the future. And one of the guys was high up in the Marines and said, like hell it is.
Hmm.
And the reality is it is. Even the Marines, even like the military, they are accepting of the fact that people have their own devices. I mean, I tried to sit down with somebody once and I said, so you have a mobile device, do you? Yeah, I have my government mobile device right here. And I said, do you use it? Got a little quiet, and they're like, yeah, kind of. Where do you do your work? Oh, I heard I own my government device. No, where do you really do your work? No, I own my government device. But you said you don't use it. Right. Where did you send that text message from? Oh, my other phone, was
Mm.
that work? That kind of thing. It gets into that conversation, and there is a lack of understanding in a lot of respects of how much work is done on mobile outside of the office and all those types of things. So we've seen that like majorly expand last year, and then it's basically done now. Some people are still hoping that everybody's going to go back to the office, and that just is not going to happen. I mean, people have tasted freedom. I know that there is a little bit of this. Like, I know from my point of view, I love working from home. I've done it for 18 years. I've not worked in an office except for 2 years out of that, and even then it was under duress. But that's a different story entirely. Worked from home and worked from remotely. Right now, just trapped in home is a little bit more of an issue. I like traveling, I like getting out, but I do think that most people are going to continue working much more remotely than they have. So,
What is
you know,
your take on the recent statements saying that we should tax home workers to recover from COVID, and how would that now impact how you would see people, whether they would go back to the office rather than be charged to work from home?
0% chance it would happen is my feeling on that one. Um, it would be a political disaster to try to tax individuals. If you tax companies, um, you would have then the question is, uh, what are you taxing and where is that revenue coming from? And it would depend on if there are tax rate changes related to office space that is owned. So basically, at the end of the day, if I'm a company and I own office space throughout whatever city, and I have workers that go into the office, and now all of a sudden they're not going to the office, I have a choice as a company. Do I want to keep that office space or get rid of that office space? How much am I paying um, in taxes and related stuff based on those offices? If that is going down, and my company has a lower overall tax burden, can the government then use other taxes against the company to recover that? I think that's a more that is more likely where that will go. But what I would think though is that our government in every area is so slow that would be. I think you could probably expect something to start to change maybe in 2022,
Yep.
2023. Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't see anything immediate changing. I think everybody's still. We need to pass the hurdle of here's a vaccine first. Not much is going to change before that.
They could try to do the taxing by, if a company got a tax incentive because they were going to make 50,000 jobs
Yeah,
in South Carolina, but then they let all those people go home, and then a few years later you look at it and realize that those 50,000 jobs aren't in South Carolina because people can work from anywhere, and 30,000 of the people are actually in other states. And so then it didn't have the economic impact on the state that the state thought it would have, and so they kind of
Mhm.
didn't follow up with what they were going to bring to the state for those
absolutely.
tax benefits.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right on that. I mean, think about Amazon with their Amazon headquarters in Crystal City, Virginia. That's it's 200 million, $300 million or something. The taxes and all these other things that were given to them, and they're doing massive refurbishment, building of buildings, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty amazing when you go and see what they're doing because there's not much space in Crystal City. It's a tight place already. And what they're doing is pretty amazing. But now the worry is that 2 years from now, those buildings are going to be empty. Um, and I actually I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that there is a point of some jobs can be done remotely and should be done remotely, and a lot of jobs need to have a personal touch. They need people to get together. There is a benefit to it. Um, but maybe at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't really thought too much about the tax portion of it. It's a really interesting thought process, though. So
No, thank you.
yeah, no, thank you. I like it. I love interesting conversation, random conversations. I mean, I have my canned stuff, but that's something I haven't thought about, and I actually want to think about that one now. So I'll be thinking about that later. But okay. To get back to this. So what I wanted to talk about specifically today is just a couple of research items that Checkpoint has found in terms of mobility risks and an example of a large scale attack that actually occurred in mobile devices and things to try to bring this back to what's real and what kind of things should be considered things that we have to care about, because that's actually one of the big issues with mobility. So the other part of my background, way before I became a mobile guy, I was a network engineer. And the reason I became a mobile guy is as a network engineer, I got this call one day and it said, "Hey, would your company be interested in selling this device? It's called a BlackBerry." So that was like the 950. If you know what that number is, that's 20 years ago. Yeah, 20
Oh
something.
God.
Yeah, the Mobitex, DataTac, those devices, powered by AA batteries. That's
I needed a warning before you were going to give me those kind of flashbacks, man.
I can go get one. I have an 857 upstairs somewhere. I don't think the DataTac or the Mobitex network is still alive, but one of the two is actually still alive for doctors and stuff, which is amazing to me. But yeah, I started back then, and I saw kind of the rise of BlackBerry. It was an amazing thing. But what I will say about it is and this sounds crazy, but BlackBerry set the scope. They set the idea. They set what mobility means to us today. Even though they're not dead, but they don't have a device play anymore. They lost that game. Mike and Jim did not. Those are the co-CEOs. Did not understand and grasp the consumer world quickly enough. But what they did do is develop devices that were corporate and security first. That's great. But what it did was set what the expectation was of most companies and also security policies. And those security policies and those ideas around the device were set in a way that says, we're going to take some software called the BES, and we're going to apply the policies that we want to a device, and that device is a secure device, and we don't have to worry about it anymore. It's a company device. We own it, and everything's fine. That moved on to what we were at a little later when Apple and Google kind of hit the streets. There were MDMs that were developed and they were pushed and used, and policies were created and done. And then they just sort of assumed that these Google devices, the Apple devices, were secure, just like the BlackBerry devices. And they were not designed the same way at all. They were designed as a consumer device to do browsing and fun stuff and games and analytics and where did you tap on the screen and what are you doing right now and where are you and what's your Bluetooth and all these other things that BlackBerry had nothing to do with, because they were all about they were all privacy issues, they're all security issues, they're all things that could be manipulated. And we didn't really take that into account as time went on. So what I'll say is that as an example of those types of insecurities, we've done a lot of research. We did our CPR group, the research group, looks at basically the industry. Mobility is one of these industries they look at, and tries to find things that are a risk overall. Think like Google zero-day stuff. It's the same basic idea. This is a group of gray hat hackers at Checkpoint that go out and try to break stuff. And they look for things that are an issue. And they've found a ton of different things over time from, they helped helped resolve the largest attack against Google ever found. Something called Ghouligan. I don't have slides on that one today, but if you ever wonder about it, we can talk about it. We've found all kinds of other different attacks, but this one, which we just found a few months ago, is called Achilles. And basically, what it is we looked at Android devices, which, if you think about Android and the way they're kind of configured, the operating system is a free operating system produced by Google, and I do mean it is free. There is no cost to it, and I'm trying to remember who said it, but there's a quote by somebody. If something is free, you are the product. There is no free. Free does not exist. Android doesn't cost anything in terms of money, but your information is for sale. That is literally how they make money. So With that in mind, that means that the device has a lot of capabilities to understand what you're doing, where you're going, what types of things you're viewing, those types of stuff. It's all in the chips. It's designed that way, and that's okay, I guess. But on the other side of that is hackers look at things where there is access. They look at devices and systems where there is a way to do something, or get information that they want out of those individual items. And there's a problem with scale. So if everything is different, if everything is custom, then hackers find that difficult. But if everything is the same, hackers find that very easy. So what we did was and this is scratching the surface stuff. This is not difficult. I'll just say. What we did was we looked at all the Android devices that are out there, and what we found is that well over 70% of them or so use the Snapdragon chipset. Now, out of the devices that use Snapdragon chipset, another 70% of those, so about 60% of the total devices, total Android devices in the world right now, use a certain series of Snapdragon chipsets. It's a bunch of different overall numbers. You can see here, this one says 855, but it's a couple, like 855, 855 something, 600 something, and a couple of different ones. And all of those use, you see here, there's the CPU location and all those types of parts of the SoC, the chip that the device uses. Those might be different, but on all of them, the Hexagon DSP core functionality, that chip, or CPU, is the same on all of them, exactly the same. So it's accessed the same, it's used the same. And at the end of the day, okay, well, that should be fine, right? Because there's security layers around that stop you from accessing things that you shouldn't be accessing on the device. Um, Except for the fact that that's not the case. That's not exactly the case. So what Hexagon DSP is, it's a secure part of the SoC, the Snapdragon SoC, that allows for processing of digital signals that could be coming from audio, could be coming from video, could be a lot of other things going on the device, writing certain things to the device code. And it is an actual CPU. Now, I say it's secure because what's supposed to happen is it's supposed to act like a TEE, if you're familiar with trusted environments. What that means is that you can't tell it to do anything unless you know the signing code for that DSP. And that would be wonderful if that actually worked. What we found is that there are a number of ways this is just, there are a number of ways, of 400 different ways that we could actually send commands to the Hexagon DSP. And when you send those commands, and again, this is not a rootkitted device that we're talking about. This is access to the Hexagon DSP is available at user level. It's just it doesn't take the code because you don't have the right certificates and stuff. But with these 400 different vulnerabilities, we were actually able to send code to the Hexagon DSP and have the Hexagon DSP act as we wanted. Now, here's a problem with that. That Hexagon DSP, because it's accessing any and all audio on the device, any and all video on the device, writing to the device's SD cards or internal memory, and a bunch of other things, including reading information, you can do a lot of stuff with the device. Even if you can't access the main CPU, you now have access behind the scenes. Once you've done that, you can basically cause the device to send to you any information you want. It's a hacker's dream. And it's also behind the scenes. There's no applications running. There's nothing on the device at all anywhere that a user can see. You cannot ask the Hexagon DSP, what are you running? It doesn't exist. That is just not part of what's going on. You can actually brick a device with that. If you have the right code and you actually access the Hexagon DSP, you can send a command to it that causes it to go in a loop, and there is no recovery. There's no reset button. There's nothing. It has its own memory space. It's done. It's dead. And obviously, the idea of having stuff on a device that you can't manage, you can't see, is a critical problem. So that is an example of something. Well, we worked with Qualcomm to put this in perspective. We talked to Qualcomm about this. I believe that was June or July that we talked to them. Because of responsible disclosure agreements, we gave them 90 days. So there was an NDA signed, 90 days. We're not going to talk about this risk at all. We're going to give you the option and ability to make a resolution for it. Now, if you're not familiar with Android devices and how Android releases are made, they are, and I'll say this as an insider in carriers. So I work for a carrier. I'm well aware of how this stuff works. Most Android devices, so some 90% of Android devices, get 3 software releases, just 3, and that's it. The first software release is the one that comes on the device when you buy it. That is done 3 to 6 months before you have the device go to a sale. There is another release that is generally a day 0 release that is produced about 2 months ahead of the device, maybe 1 month. And then there is one more that is generally done within 3 months of the device's release, generally released at about 6 months because it takes a while to do certifications. So at that point, there are no more software releases.
Wow.
And that's it. That's Android. Now, headline devices, that's not necessarily the case. So like an S10, you might have a couple more releases, that type of thing. But by and large, they're done. So now what does that mean for this particular issue? Now, I've had a couple of people challenge me and say, right, but once you hit Android 10, software releases are one thing, but security releases are something else. Google will release a security release, and those are on a fairly regular basis. That is true, but it does not affect underlying code, and it does not affect firmware. And this is a firmware issue. Period.
Is this, you're making me, and I'm not a hardware guru, but you're making me think about Spectre Meltdown. Is this in any way similar, related? Is this the Android version of Spectre Meltdown?
It is not a predictive attack. So it is not similar in terms of the way it's actually enacted. That being said, yes, it is. It's an underlying chipset. You can't really get rid of it without a firmware code. So Spectre and Meltdown, you needed a microcode update. This is just a microcode for the Hexagon DSP.
Gotcha.
But that is not. You can't do that without having the software code updated on the device.
Yeah, and most of the like Samsung, LG, everybody else, they've abandoned and moved on to the next version, so they're not gonna spend time patching and especially the firmware.
So the correct way to fix this is to yeet the phone.
But even if they did, the carriers won't approve it. I mean,
right.
As a carrier, if you have like say you're Sprint, and that's where I work. You have Sprint, you have Boost, you have about 4 other MVNOs. All of these different companies have devices that are based off of the main device you sell, and you might have 2 or 3 different versions of that device. Every single one of those devices has to go through your lab for a full test with the software. That means that you could have 8 to 10 versions of that software being tested to just get the software out. And that's just one device. And if there are 20 different devices, each one of those has 8 to 10 different revisions. And each one of those has to have software done for it. And it's all specific. I mean, I know people complain all the time about why don't the carriers get software out faster? It's hard. It's really hard. They have to make sure it works on the networks. And I will tell you, again, as an insider, the code that the OEMs provide is terrible. I can, as an example, if any of you have a Samsung device and have a Bixby button, how much do you hate the Bixby button? That makes as much sense as half the code that goes into the devices.
God.
It's just bad.
That's why I love HTC and Google.
Yeah. Google Pixel is the prime example of the anti version of that. Here is a device. It's simple. We're not adding any extra crap to it. Done, and it works. All the other ones, there's always extra stuff, and a lot of it is kind of a mess.
Yeah.
And it's just the way they are because they're not going to be as dedicated. They don't need to be. But I digress. So at the end of the day, so for Achilles and what it means to us, so Achilles itself, there is a firmware update that Qualcomm produced, and it was released, but it only affected 4 or 5% of the devices that are out there, if that. And then on top of that, Android devices as a rule are not updated. So like on an Apple device, 85% of Apple devices are on current code at any one time, including all the updates, changes, everything. within like I think the 85% number is within 20 to 30 days of a software release. That's amazing. And on Android, 85% of the devices never update, ever. They just never get a software update. People don't install it, whatever. So it's a very different world. And that's not to say Apple is completely free and clear. I'll just say that. But there's some other issues that Apple faces, and I'll talk about something in a second. And it's a real life example of something. So that's kind of Achilles in a nutshell. It's just one risk, but we thought it's an interesting risk, something to think about in terms of the differences and stuff that we're not necessarily thinking about. You go back in time. I know you said a meltdown of Spectre, but it's actually more akin to like Heartbleed. You have underlying code that needs resolution, and it's affecting tens of thousands of devices, or in this case, almost 1 billion devices. And it's a real risk.
Hey, Scott,
Go
we
ahead.
have a question come in, and they're asking where you're getting the stats on the updates for the devices.
The stats on the device updates would be out of our research group. So they have looked into the numbers of devices that are out there, which types of devices are active, which ones have what chipsets, because most of those are actually provided publicly based off of why can I not remember the name of the group? There are some groups that basically do research on the metrics of devices. So they're fairly well known because you want to understand those for marketing reasons. So most that's fairly public, and then we can do extrapolations out and say, okay, if
Is that information coming from the carriers?
Some of it comes from the carriers, most of it comes from the OEMs. So the OEMs are proud about how many devices they sell.
Yes.
So,
but where you get the statistics about the updates, I guess that's when they release the updates. Is that
Google releases most of that? So like Apple releases the 85% figure on their side, and Google releases it. I don't remember where they're getting it from specifically. My apologies. I just don't know.
No, it's okay. No, it's good. Thank you.
Google tracks the devices. I think that most of that is done for purposes of like web development and application development, because if you're an app developer, you need to understand what devices you should be targeting and what features they have. So a lot of that information is available on the development side.
Yeah, I used to work at Verizon back in the day, and it was pretty common knowledge that, how terrible Android devices were at getting updated, and maybe that was insider or somewhat insider, but I think it's pretty much public. There's at least some companies that report on it and say, hey, here's the number of devices in the world, and most of them are running outdated, no longer patched versions of Android.
Yeah, and I know from my time at Sprint, the level of devices that were out of date was pretty insane, because it directly affected our network. There were some major updates. If you're familiar with what a PRL is, we could tell a lot of stuff about what devices are on what networks, because if you got a PRL update but you couldn't use a certain band because the device wasn't updated, it caused all kinds of hell. So there were ways that we could tell devices being out of date. And then I think there was something else. I can't remember what the name was. It was some kind of I'm not sure what I can give out in terms of the information on it, because it's way out of date, and I don't want to terrify anybody, because there were ways that you could basically force traffic to go through this store application thing. I think that's actually dead now. If you've probably heard the story, like about a year ago, somebody figured out that depending upon where your traffic was being sent, if it went through certain carriers were adding information on to web strings, and in certain places where you're doing an HTTP link. Fortunately enough, HTTPS, that's not possible anymore. But for HTTP stuff, you would have extra tags on, and the tags are enough information for whoever you're communicating with to know information about your device. Obviously, that's not really terribly pretty, and a lot of people don't like it, but HTTPS kind of solves most of that. So it's not perfect, but it's better.
We use Duo for two-factor authentication, and generally it's an app on a phone that people install. So you do get to see application versions and whether they're out of date and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, it's easy to tell. Like an OS version is a lot easier to tell. You can actually, as a programmer, ask for the OS version. So a lot of analytics companies get that information about devices. Apple makes it very difficult, though. You can tell the OS version, but you can't tell any information about other applications and other things. I'll have stories about that later, but that's all right. Any more questions about Achilles or devices? If not, I'll move on to the other quick story. And again, these two stories that I'm talking about, this is most of what I'm talking about today. The rest is going to be marketing material, and we'll kind of fluff through it. And anything that you want to know, we'll talk about. But the other story is actually an attack that happened. Now, I'm going to be vague on names because our IRT team got involved and it went into with TLAs, so three-letter acronym agencies. No details. Other than one of those three-letter acronym agencies might be the FBI. I'll just say that, and they're controlling and running all that. So what happened is about 2 months ago now. So this is still fairly recent. This is not something that's like ancient news. We do a lot of stuff on the internet. We do a lot of stuff with customers. We're always out there trying to get customers educated, understanding of mobility and risks related to mobility. Because to us, we see that as a place that has very limited protections, a lot of assumptions of protection, though. And that is not necessarily a good place to be. If you ask most of our customers, you say, okay, if there was an issue, and they turn around, but it's a mobile device, there's no issues. Right. But if there was an issue, do you have any way to tell what happened? That's when things get a little bit more blank. And this is a kind of an instance of that. But there's a silver lining. So what happened is that there's a group of hackers out there, and they were targeting a specific entity. This particular entity is an international firm. They have offices throughout the world and in the U.S. and other countries and many other big countries, and they are not a small company. So they have lots of stuff. The hackers wanted to get into their systems. They attempted to hack inside their perimeter, try to get into all of their internal systems, their data centers, and all that. Were unable to, which is great. So their protections were working. Then they went to their cloud systems. Now, most of the cloud systems were pretty good. They had a lot of good security. Everything was set up fairly well. And the hackers didn't find any particular easy ways in. But what they found is that one system was available on the cloud and not terribly well secured. And that system was their MDM. So their mobile device, their mobile device management system was not terribly well secured. So obviously, they're going to take that door and go in. And then they decided, what do we do with an MDM? What can we do with an MDM? Well, we got to think about what is the purpose of an MDM? Purpose of an MDM is to manage your devices, give you an inventory of what you have, tell you what applications users have installed, and to provide applications out to people, as well as provide policies out to those devices. And all that stuff is great. But if a hacker controls that, what happens? Well, hackers can actually send their own versions of applications out to devices. And if they do it that way, it doesn't look like there's a problem. I mean, they're just apps that are being sent down. They look like developed apps by the company with signatures of the company going down to devices. It's perfect. It's exactly what you want as a distribution method for both good and bad software. And so the hackers did exactly that. They sent out a virus containing software down to the end users. The end users received the software and installed it, and then opened the software up to see what it did. It didn't do anything terribly useful. We use an example we call MobileConf. We did for an RSA conference. I'll just say there's a different story. I'm not going to get into it today. If you ever want to hear it, we'll talk about it later. I'll just say it involved Checkpoint getting kicked out of RSA and then invited back. So it's a good story. This particular one, though, they sent an application out that looked like something that was plausible for the company, but it didn't do anything. So, it looked like IT just jumped the gun and sent something out. So the users opened it up, whatever, put it in the background and didn't think about it because it didn't affect their day-to-day lives. So they're not going to call anybody about it, which is key part number one. How do you do this stuff and remain hidden? You do something like that. It's very well hidden. It's in the background. No big deal. Now, here's the silver lining. This particular company at this point is hacked. But on the other side of that, somewhere in the meantime, they had been talking to us and had considered, do we need to do any kind of protection services? Do we need what we call mobile threat defense? And we call it Sandblast Mobile, but they said maybe. We'll consider it. We said, let's just get a POC. We'll get this installed. We'll get it turned on and have it protecting a couple of devices. They actually did that with us and a couple of other vendors because, again, they're a very large company. So, of course, they're going to compare and contrast and do that kind of thing. So what happened? Well, they had a couple of devices with our software on it. The hackers, fortunately enough, didn't know anything about Sandblast Mobile. They didn't know anything about what MTP, mobile threat defense, is. They didn't know to say, oh, these devices are part of this group. We're not going to touch it. So when they sent the software out to all these different devices, they included devices that were protected by our software as well as devices that were protected by other people's software. And when it hit the devices, we saw stuff start to happen. Now, we do two things when software is installed. First is we keep note of it. The second is we test it. So we started testing the software as soon as it hit the device. And on the device, we have a couple of protection systems in place. One of those protection systems looks at outbound traffic from the device and tries to figure out where is it going, what types of information systems is it connecting to, that type of thing. So the software is installed on the device. We actually can't stop that. There's some limitations on that. That's actually an Apple and Google thing. So we could stop a user from downloading from a third-party store, but I can't stop an MDM from pushing software to the device. That's kind of the whole point of an MDM. So the software hits the device. We start testing the software in our systems, and we see from the device it connecting to different places. It was connecting to, from our point of view, it was connecting to two different places. One was an internal system that the company ran, which is evidently one of the targets of the hackers. The second thing that it was doing was connecting to the cloud to download the full payload of what it was supposed to do. So that full payload included the actual malicious content, how to connect to systems, how to break stuff. All that stuff was contained in a secondary package that was not in the distributed software. We saw that secondary connection. Now the thing there is, we did a comparison of where is the device going to, is that okay, and said based off of information we had in our threat cloud that is not okay. That is a hacker's destination, and stop the communication. So in effect, while the software was installed, it couldn't do anything. It was running on our devices. And then within about 5 minutes, we had done our comparisons in the back end, looked at the software, looked at the payload that was being downloaded, because we do a duplication of the devices and do a whole bunch of stuff to emulate their environment. And we saw the payload that was being sent down and said, oh, no, this is malware, end of story. And immediately sent down a message to the devices, marking those as red alert, and worked with the customer, got our people involved, got the IRT, the incident response team involved, and got the TLAs involved at that point. So we were able to provide protection. The devices that did not have our software on it, or in fact actually had a competitor software on it, multiple competitors, no one else found the software. So that's our own, blowing our own horn kind of thing, but no one else saw the problem. No one else detected it. And the users themselves didn't see anything. And there was no tracking. There was nothing that they could say, generate, or reason with that said this was the problem. So the hackers, if it weren't just for dumb luck for having our software installed for a POC, they would have been hacked and had no idea how the hackers got in, how they got to the information, how they exfiltrated it, and how they disappeared. Because at the end of the day, what they would have done is just delete the application off the devices. And the users never would have noticed it because they didn't run it, on any given basis.
So is this like an EDR for a mobile device?
Not kind of.
Or
So
more
yeah,
for IR?
it is more IR, but it can be considered somewhere in between.
Okay.
So let's see. So the basic gist is, if you think about like an endpoint protection solution, like just think a regular one for a PC. It's very similar to that in some respects. Obviously, we have to take the mobility piece into account. And if you do have an MDM, we do combine with MDMs. So the MDM that this other customer was running, we combined with that MDM. We do an integration. I can show you a different page. I'll skip 2 slides.
Yeah, because if your MDM is hosed, then you've got a little bit of a problem there. But normally, that's a bit of a unique entry point for someone to take over your MDM. I wouldn't think that's normal.
You think so, but any attack entry point is good for a hacker. They don't care how they get into the systems. It's just one more system that gets attacked. So in this customer's case, they did have an MDM. We were hooked up to the MDM. So this dashboard connects to the MDM. It syncs information out of it, but we also sync information back into it. So if you see on the screen, you can see that at the top left of the dashboard, I know it's really tiny. I'm asking you to look at Chicken Scratch. It says that there are 320 devices, and the next to it says 16 in high risk. Now, what that means, and you don't have to read that it says high risk. You can trust me; it really does say that. What it means by that is says there are 16 devices that we have a very high concern about. There's malware on these 16 devices. That information is written back into the MDM. So whether that be Intune, AirWatch, Mobile Iron, Mods 360, or all the other ones you see on the screen, we write that information back to the MDM, and then depending upon which MDM, we can perform actions. So from the point of view of like Intune, if a device is in high risk, we can say the device is now not compliant. And if you've ever done any compliancy work on Microsoft, basically that means that this device doesn't work, we're going to cut it off. So I know you said, is it like an EDR? Kind of, because you actually can take proactive actions to eliminate the risk of that device. You can cordon it off, disconnect it from your corporate network, all that kind of thing.
It's quarantined.
Yeah, exactly. We have on the device as well. So we have that protection service where we're looking at the outbound traffic. We can actually extend that and say, if the device is in high risk, we're going to stop all traffic to whatever systems you want us to stop traffic to. So you can set up, we call it conditional access, but you can say, if it were Checkpoint, we can say, we're going to stop access to any checkpoint.com address. We're going to stop access to Slack. We're going to stop access to, whatever systems we want, Altesian, all that kind of stuff. We're going to stop access. We don't want any of our users to be able to access any of these sites or the applications on these devices either to access anything related to internal resources. Plus, the MDM could kick in and do something. And that goes for AirWatch and Mobile Iron and all the rest. We write that same information to those as well. They see it, and boom, an action gets triggered. The cool thing, though, is that it is auto-remediating. So when the risk goes away, the device is now no longer at risk, so we can remove those compliance checks, and the user goes back to normal. Everything is fine again. But of course, we're going to have logs of everything. The administrative staff will know that there was a breach, and they can go figure it out. And we keep all the forensics information and all the other stuff. So all that's there for them to kind of go back and review. And we of course tie into all the main SIMs, Splunk, Splunk, and then ArcSight, and then almost everything else is just on our syslog format, data throughput to or output to everything from QRadar to whatever. I mean, it's pretty open. So, like I said, I didn't want to go too much into the selling kind of this, but what I will say, because the one thing that I get challenged on the most with these types of solutions is big brotherism. Our devices and our ability to provide good protections on devices does take into account BYOD. We aren't Google. We charge for our service. It ain't free. It's not a lot of money, but it's not free. So we're not collecting like metadata to figure out where you've been, were you near a Macy's this morning, when you get gas, when you arrive in an office, if you go to an office, those types of things. We don't track any of that stuff. All we're doing is saying, is this malicious? Yes or no. Everything else is thrown away. So it's a very clear, easy solution designed around that idea of privacy. We provide huge privacy documents that explain it in detail, and we try very hard to keep it at the level of it's not a problem. You don't have to worry about this in terms of worrying about Big Brother. We also offer a whole bunch of other types of parts to the privacy issues. You can see on the screen we talk about GDPR, and it's not that we provide GDPR compliance or anything like that, but our system is it assists with a company maintaining their GDPR compliance. And we also have some systems in place. The one that might look a little bit confusing says on-premises offering for PII encryption. That basically means that we have the ability to not have any PII appear in the cloud in our system, because there's a dashboard. It is a cloud item. It is not on site, but there's a way to do some encryption so that nothing appears in the cloud. It's very useful for police and agencies that really literally have a safety issue for the information appearing anywhere outside of their organization. So
you're mainly looking at the malware side of things, not like data compliance or governance or anything like that.
Correct. It's not so much governance. It's malicious use, not necessarily malware, but malicious use.
Okay.
So I'll go back one more page. So it's going to be things like, is the Wi-Fi network you're connected to okay? Has that network been taken over? Are they redirecting traffic? Are they doing SSL stripping or bumping? That kind of thing.
Okay.
Malicious software, of course. The OS itself, are there risks that you might not be aware of that could be contained within that, like Achilles, or jailbreaking and rootkitting? We've actually found a lot of rootkits on devices that others didn't find. If I remember earlier, I was talking about the TCL thing. We found rootkits based on our software on these little black boxes that a customer was running to do network speed tests around the world. There's a long story behind that, and it didn't make any sense to me either. Don't worry. But they were sending these devices all over the place, and they would do speed tests at different facilities and different networks. And they were all rootkitted. They bought them right from the factory, rootkitted.
Nice.
Yeah, and we've seen little things like that all over the place. So we help you with that as well. And then, of course, we have the on-device network protection system, which is designed to stop traffic that is going to places that are bad. Now that sounds kind of vague, but it means that if you have an application that's malicious on the device, we can stop the traffic that would be outbound from it. It also means that if you receive an SMS that has a link in it, or an iMessage or a Telegram or whatever, it doesn't matter how it gets to you. If you have something on your device and you're acting upon it, we can evaluate that action. So if I click on a link from an SMS and it's going to send me to a page that looks just like Checkpoint's M365 page. We don't actually have an M365 page, but if we did, and it opened up and it had all Checkpoint's logos on it, I might, as a user, not know that that's not actually my page. The system actually can check that and make sure that I'm not actually going to something that isn't my page, and it will tell me that something's wrong. It actually looks like this if that happens. I click on something and the next page it says it's blocked. Now this particular image actually says guns.com because the organizational security policy, what it actually means is that we also have in there a URL filtering capability. That's not really appropriate for BYOD, but for corporately controlled devices, yeah, maybe that is the right way to go. So we also offer that as well.
Yeah, that's been a huge problem. I work in government, and it's been a huge problem with, we can't necessarily, take over or put our MDM on BYOD devices, and trying to manage or even accept the risk of BYOD devices has been very difficult for us.
Absolutely.
Big challenge to come over, and we've kind of just had to swallow it because of COVID. Because, like you said earlier on, like, we were all thinking about this last year, but we didn't really do anything about it because we weren't ready for it yet. So now we're like, holy crap, well, we're just going to have to accept the risk because we don't have any other choice.
Exactly. I mean, like I said, a year ago, there were people just saying, hell no, it ain't happening. And today, every agency that I know of, people are remote. You can't go into the office. You have to be able to do this. And, they've been forced to move into the late 20th century at this point. They're not quite 21st, but they're getting there.
Yeah.
But
so,
I mean,
I think it's worth noting. I mean, here's what Checkpoint does with us. Checkpoint gives me a laptop to work on. If I so choose to want to work off of my phone and access corporate data, then I must run our security.
Yeah, exactly.
If I don't want to run our security, work off my laptop.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, but one of the big things that, so I work at a university, and in some departments, they didn't have laptops, but they had to get work done. So, you send people home and you have people using phones that are their personal phones that generally don't have a protection, or you're even using a desktop or a laptop at home that doesn't have any corporate protections. So on top of all that, you're kind of in that situation where everybody is using these devices and can't afford to send people home with things like that.